There is no mention of or reference to Jesus Christ anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Jesus didn't exist anywhere near the composition of the text of the Hebrew Bible. Now, the authors of the text of the New Testament, and specifically the Gospels, told stories about Jesus in ways that were specifically designed to reflect first century CE understandings of what was expected by the original authors and audiences of those texts that can be understood to have a messianic expectation. But there's no case to make that those authors and audiences expected precisely what we find in the life and the mission of Jesus of Nazareth. The only case that can be made is that the Hebrew Bible plausibly leaves conceptual space to negotiate Jesus into some of those messianic expectations. Jesus can only be found by negotiating Jesus into the text. Jesus is not native to the text. And this is one of the main differences between a critical approach to understanding the Hebrew Bible and an apologetic approach. A critical approach does its best to try to identify and then leave aside the later conceptual frameworks and interpretive lenses to try to reconstruct the lenses and the frameworks of the original authors and audiences so we can most closely approximate what they most likely understood by their texts. An apologetic approach is not interested in what they most likely understood. An apologetic approach is interested in finding their ideologies and dogmas in the text, and so it must navigate around the data and find conceptual space to negotiate those dogmas in and say the data do not preclude us from finding what we want in the text. The data do not make it impossible that what we want to find could have been intended. But if we prioritize what the authors and audiences understood by these texts, then Jesus of Nazareth is not found anywhere in the Hebrew Bible.
Now, this is exactly what I mean when I say that Christians and Christian apologists shoehorn Jesus in order to make him fit into the Old Testament. And this was one of the biggest issues that they had with the Gnostics and the Marcionites, is the fact that they were saying that Jesus was against the Old Testament God and was not part of that entire Old Testament ideology. But of course, the Council of Nicaea with the Nicene Creed was like, hell no, we got to have this whole thing together, because what was the original goal of Vespasian initiating this new religion? And that is to quell the Jewish revolts. And then later on with Constantine, it is to quell the infighting of Christians. But back to the conversation at hand here. Christians like to say that Jesus has always been part of the Old Testament because of John 1, where it talks about the Word being God. And then that gives them the opportunity to say that Jesus was in the beginning with God and is God. And therefore, he is the God, he is the Son of God, and all of his complete personification, which gives you your Trinity. The problem with that is that if Jesus is God, then all the genocidal maniac things that God did, then Jesus would be the same as that God who committed all those, what I would call, crimes against humanity and the world. They also like to bring in Isaiah, where it talks about a young girl will give birth to the Messiah. But the problem is when you go and you look at the ancient writings, not the Septuagint, not the Greek, but go back and look at the ancient Hebrew, the Proto-Hebrew, what you see that it says is the young girl has given birth. And that would indicate Hezekiah and not Jesus. But those lines were renegotiated in order to fit Jesus into the Old Testament as if they were talking about Jesus and not talking about Hezekiah. But if you go beyond the Bible that they give you, you'll be able to recognize that. But if you stay with what they have given you, then all that you will ever know is what they have desired for you to know. And here's another aspect of it. Since all the writings concerning Jesus were written at minimum 2 to 3 decades after he supposedly lived, but most almost a century after he supposedly lived, then it is very easy to Monday morning quarterback the Gospels and all the other New Testament writings in order to fit Jesus into those old paradigms. Let me give you an example of how Christians are still doing this today. Since it is written in your books of Revelations and throughout the Gospels as to what to look for the end times, Christians now take almost every situation that has any similarity to any of the events that has already been written about and shoehorn those in to fit into the end times. But yet every generation claims that they are living in the end times and that God is seconds away. Jesus is seconds away from his return. The end is only minutes away and you better get your life right. That fear tool that they are using is shoehorning in what the New Testament has said about the end of days, although they were talking about Nero coming back. They were not talking about today. They were talking about then, during the time frame of that generation, not today. So when the Euphrates Rivers is having its drying season, then it's, oh, here's the end times. Yet it's out of order because first, 4 angels are supposed to appear next to the Euphrates and then have a 2 million man army and kill 1/3 of the population. That hasn't happened yet. So the Euphrates drying up and it being a causeway, a road for this Antichrist and his military person and his priest, and then demons pop out of their heads, that hasn't happened yet either. Meaning that the Antichrist has to come first and establish himself before the Euphrates River dries up. So therefore, you're shoehorning in the aspect of the Euphrates that is relatively drying right now. It will return. But where's your Antichrist that has to come first? And for those of you who believe in a rapture, to which that wasn't invented until the 1800s, for those of you who believe in a rapture, is not your rapture supposed to happen before the Antichrist come? Where is your rapture? It has not happened yet. Therefore, the Euphrates River drying has absolutely nothing to do with the book of Revelations. Not to mention all the other seals and things that are supposed to happen prior to that happening. Where is the evidence of all of that first? When did the waters all become blood? Not turn red, but become blood. Those things haven't happened either. So stop trying to shoehorn in your religion into what happens in today and stop trying to shoehorn in your Jesus. Christians would be better off if they had followed the Marcionite or they had followed the Gnostics of Arius instead of following the Orthodox Christianity that was supported by the Roman army, which is the only reason that you have the belief system that you have today. Y'all have a great day. And remember always, you got to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.